This is a prayer for gatherings by Abdu'l-Baha. O thou kind Lord, these are thy servants who have gathered in this meeting, have turned unto thy kingdom and are in need of thy bestowal and blessing. O thou God, manifest and make evident the signs of thy oneness, which have been deposited in all the realities of life. Reveal and unfold the virtues which thou hast made latent and concealed in these human realities. O God, we are as plants, and thy bounty is as the rain. Refresh and cause these plants to grow through thy bestowal. We are thy servants. Free us from the fetters of material existence. We are ignorant, make us wise. We are dead, make us alive. We are material, endow us with spirit. We are deprived, make us the intimates of thy mysteries. We are needy, enrich and bless us from thy boundless treasury. O God, resuscitate us, give us sight, give us hearing. Familiarize us with the mysteries of life, so that the secrets of thy kingdom may become revealed to us in this world of existence, and we may confess thy oneness. Every bestowal emanates from thee, every benediction is thine. Thou art mighty, thou art powerful, thou art the giver, and thou art the ever bounteous. Hello again, everyone, and thank you for being here. We welcome you all. Welcome guests and friends. Have a wonderful evening for you tonight. I have on my left a very special gentleman who I've had the pleasure of knowing since I was much younger. And he used to live in my hometown in New Jersey. There is so much that I can say about him because he has such a breadth of experience in many different fields, from music and entertainment to finance and all kinds of interesting things. I understand at one time he had he had hair, and it was really long. And I understand that there are a lot of wonderful stories that he could share about that time in his life, but I haven't been able to pry them out of him yet. But I'm working on that. Tonight's talk is called The Divine Economy, which Michael will explain further. It's covering spiritual solutions to economic problems. And Michael currently is a vice president with Raymond James and Associates, which is a financial institution here in Florida. He comes from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we've been fortunate that he stayed over a couple of extra days while down here on business to have this presentation with us. He's been in the investment business for almost 30 years. And he's been a Baha'i since 1970. He'd heard about the faith. This is always of interest to Baha'is. So how'd you hear about the faith? He'd heard about it from friends in St. Louis, Missouri, and then he declared while in Hawaii. Now, I believe we have someone else here who also declared in Hawaii, don't we, Roger? There must be something in the water in Hawaii. Oh. We're going to have to look into that. Michael has been an active member of the Baha'i Faith for many years, serving in many capacities. He's currently serving on his local spiritual assembly in Michigan in the capacity of treasurer. They must be in very safe hands there. And has served as a financial advisor to the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States for over 20 years. So we are really looking forward to this talk. We are delighted to have him here. Please welcome our friend Michael Hampton.
Okay, is this microphone on? We're all set? I'm going to come down here. Somebody said, oh, you must be the guest lecturer. I'm following Lisa, right? And my style, hopefully, is not lecturing, because that pretends like I'm supposed to know something. And when it it comes to a subject that we're going to talk about tonight, the bar has been raised. So we're going to hopefully redefine some of the terminology that we're accustomed to talking about. Things like economy and money and some of those things that kind of get us to cringe a little bit when we talk about them. So what we're going to do is use some references from a book that you, I'm sure, would have access to called The World Order of Baha'u'llah. And it was written in the early 20s and mid-20s and early 30s by Shoghi Effendi. Shoghi Effendi was the great-grandson, of Baha'u'llah. For those of you that are not familiar or that familiar with the Baha'i faith, we're going to do just a real quick intro. And so the Baha'i faith began in 1844 through the introduction of a person with a title by the name of the Gate, or the Bab. And Baha'is believe that the Bab and then later Baha'u'llah were the beginning voices of God that brought and established what we believe the latest message for the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Now we're going to relate that kingdom of heaven on earth to our topic tonight, and we're going to refer to it as the divine civilization. We're also going to call it the divine economy, once we've redefined economy. But Baha'u'llah, Baha'is believe, is the latest voice. Now, I had a discussion today with a new friend, and the friend said, well, talk to me about conversion. And I said, in my experience, Baha'is don't convert. What I have noticed over the years is that people who come in contact with the Baha'i faith and are attracted to it already believe the principles of the faith. And those are things like the oneness of humanity, the oneness of God's creation, the oneness of religion that has come to us, that there is one God, that there is a belief that there is one race, and that's the human race, and our shapes and sizes and colors are an effect of science and how we as human beings have formed on this planet. And we're going to cover more of those principles later, but people typically, when they come in contact with them, I can tell you that for me, my father was a Christian clergyman. He was a minister in a denomination called the Assembly of God Church. And at age 5, I used to challenge my father. And we'd have these deep intellectual discussions at age 5 about the oneness of religion. And I can tell you that it was in me that I saw the oneness. I grew up in a Southern family. There was a lot of racism. And I challenged that racism at a very, very early age. Why was that? I believe that human beings are born without their prejudices, without the ignorance. I believe their heart in its purest form has been created nobly. And there are writings about that. Baha'u'llah himself has written writings that talks about our creation as being noble. So back to the conversion process. Ultimately, there's probably a sense of its rightness of those principles. But then there's that whole discovery process is, well, who is Baha'u'llah? And is he who he says he is? And that's a topic that is a lifelong process for some people. And for others, they instantly get it and say, he is, in my heart, the manifestation of God for this day. And we can't determine that for you as Baha'is. We can only facilitate your investigation. So you have to decide for yourself. Well, one of the joys for me, growing up in a Christian environment, there was a lot of guilt. And boy, I'm glad I don't have to worry about that guilt anymore. I just have to worry about me. But I need to be responsible in regards to being able to facilitate a person's investigation, including my own. Okay, enough said. Now, I mentioned we're going to do some reading. So we're going to take this, and there's a lot of books by Shoghi Effendi. And the reason I'm using them is because he's talked about this thing called the divine economy. And there are quotes from Baha'u'llah in this book, and from Abdul Baha, who is the son of Baha'u'llah. Now, Baha'u'llah means the glory of God. For those of you and those of us that came from a Christian background, are you aware that Christ didn't say that he was returning as the Son of God? He said, I shall come in the glory of the Father. And in other places, it talks about the first station of the I am. He in the first station, meaning the Father, and not in the station as the Son. So if Baha'u'llah is who he says he is, that title then clearly fits, doesn't it? The glory of the Father. So then it would behoove Baha'is to always, along with our Christian friends and Buddhist friends and Muslim friends and Jewish friends, that if we have a discussion, it's really critical that we learn our scripture, that we memorize our scripture as best we can. And I can tell you that for me, I didn't leave the house in the morning as a child without scripture. And we didn't go to bed at night without scripture. Well, do you know that in the Baha'i faith, we're encouraged to do the same thing? Study the scripture. And we're also encouraged to memorize. And so it's a very important thing. So if you want to improve at something, you would try and not only study it, but you'd get around those who are knowledgeable. So there's a place in the Bible that it says, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the seat of the scornful. For his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree which is planted by the rivers of water, which bringeth forth its fruit in its season. Do you know Baha'u'llah has several passages in a very small book called the Hidden Words that is very identical to that. So if you want to be good at something, you've got to get around somebody who's good at it, right? If you were going to be a great athlete, you would want to compete and be around the best coaches and the best athletes in that field. So if you want to grow spiritually, you'd probably want to get around the latest information that you could perceive to be from the source that feeds our spirituality. So we're going to start with something from Baha'u'llah. It's really quick. The world's equilibrium hath been upset through the vibrating influence of this most great, this new world order. Now, politically, we've heard that term for the last couple of decades, New World Order, haven't we? And wherever those politicians got this concept, Baha'is believe that the blueprint for a New World Order, or the divine civilization, or the kingdom of heaven on earth, was delivered by Baha'u'llah. So what are we going to talk about? A piece of divine civilization is called the divine economy. Now, we need to define what those terms mean. So anybody want to take a stab at divine? And if you've got a soft voice, maybe we need to use a floating mic. Anybody? Raise your hand. Anybody want to take a stab? Come on. Here we go. Please.
Tony can shout out.
Tony, go ahead. Is your name Tony?
Yeah.
Please.
Stand.
If it's divine, it is of God. That's simple.
Okay. Anyone else?
Universal.
Universal. Okay. Do those fit? Of God and universal? I'm seeing heads shake. Yes? I'm sorry? Perfect. Ooh. She just raised the bar as well, didn't she? Of God, perfect, and universal. Yes?
That it is good and it's workable around the globe.
Ooh.
Which spiritually benefits all.
That which spiritually benefits all. that which works around the globe, that's universal, that's perfect, that's of God. Yes. It's the truth. Yes, Hardy. Follows God's will. Ooh, yes, Bob.
Filled with justice.
Filled with justice. Wow. Does this feel comfortable? It feels like we're putting on, a comfortable pair of socks and shoes here to me. It just kind of fits me. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm getting it. Anybody else? Yes. With love. We're going to cover that topic, both hopefully spiritually, but scientifically tonight. Yes, but that really fits. Untouchable. Meets a pretty high standard if it's untouchable, doesn't it? Yes. It's pure. Wow. This audience is the meeting of the minds. Whew. Infinity. Now there is a scientific term. I like that. Okay? Anybody else? All right, let's shift gears. Let's shift gears, because we're going to come back to divine. Let's go to this word economy. Now this is Economics 101. Don't let it scare you. But anybody want to take a stab at this thing? Now some of you have heard my talks, so it's okay. You can speak up if you like. Yes?
The dynamics of finance.
The dynamics of finance. Okay? The workings of finance. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Anyone else? Anyone take economics in any sense of the word? Yes. Guns and butter? Okay. I know what he meant. I hope the rest of you get it. Yes. Bartering and trust, a system. Ooh, okay. All right. If you go to the Old English Dictionary, you're going to, how many of you know what an old unabridged dictionary looks like? It would be books, volumes of books would be about as wide as 4 chairs wide. That's about what the Old English Oxford English Dictionary looks like. And they'll take a word and, they'll expound on it. So you take this word, and there's a definition in there that really fits the concept of the divine economy. And it means this. It is a system of providence. And it uses a capital P. How's that fit? Are you comfortable with that? Now let's talk about guns and butter and a system. Let's talk about it in the sense of finance. If we look at the world of economics and break it down in its simplest form, people today would say that it's a system by which we exchange values. I provide goods and services, and you provide either a resource of currency to pay me for those goods and services, or you barter, using the word barter, another means by which I value it. Okay. So before we go on, let's have another basic 101 definition, and let's get that out of the way. In a world of economics, a social economic system, you have to have some understanding of what's valuable, which is called an asset, and what's not, right? Assets and liabilities. We all understand those terms? Okay, so if you're comfortable with that, then we'll say, name a few assets. Real estate. Yeah. Human rights. Yes, Roger. Knowledge. Go ahead. That's yours? Knowledge? Homes, okay. Yes. Commodities, okay. Anyone else? I'm sorry? Gold? Gold? Faith. Interesting. Yes. Service. Information. No one named money.
We're too cool for that.
You're too cool for that. All right. Well, maybe you're sensitized to divine economy already. Because hopefully when we walk away, we'll start viewing things a little differently. So, we come at this divine economy with spiritual eyes, from a perspective of love, a perspective of spirit, okay, focused on a system of providence, with a capital P, that has something to do with human beings. So I heard the words that I needed to focus on. All of these are correct under some circumstances, but I will tell you this. The one thing that we can kind of rely on that is an asset is human knowledge and human opinion. Okay? Now, if somebody had said the word currency or money, I would say, which currency? But you did say gold, and I would say that sometimes gold has greater value than others. That's called a commodity, right? Well, who's giving it that value? A collection of human beings, right? It's not some kind of weird system out there that says it's worth X. So human knowledge and human opinion. Now there's one other thing kind of thrown in, and I'm going to use the word emotion. Anybody ever feel emotional about the market? You know, I get paid not to be emotional about the market. You know, it goes up and down like this, and, you know, in my early days I used to think, wow, this is exciting. And today it's like, okay, this is what I expect. It's like getting on a roller coaster too many times. After a while, the thrill is gone. All right, so let's use the foundation of this as human knowledge and human opinion as the source for our understanding of what really has potential value in every social economic system. If that's the case, then maybe we need to define knowledge. And where does it come from? That's potentially one question or two. I'll leave it up to you. Anybody want to answer or take a stab at that? Yes? That's a start, because that's one language. And knowing what's in it, that's one. Okay, yes, Tony.
Not very original, but I think knowledge is truth.
Knowledge is truth. Ooh. Roger. Know how. Okay. Susan.
An inner knowing,
An inner knowing.
a heart-centered.
Okay. Yes. Knowledge of God. Okay. We may have to define God, which is not going to be possible, but we'll talk about that. Yes.
Knowledge is an accumulation of information and a portion of understanding of that knowledge, where everything else is
Okay. Now I'm going to go back to one of the principles of the Baha'i faith, because I think I've got enough to work with. One of the principles of the Baha'i faith is that science, the study of information, the study of truth, and religion agree. They're both the same study. They just come at things from different angles. And one professes that there is this force called a God. And one professes, especially if you've studied anything at all about quantum physics, it professes that there is a force greater than human capacity to understand that all knowledge comes from, and it's not confined to time and space. Okay? Now, if that's true, and we go back and study the Baha'i writings, we get all kinds of information about the sources of knowledge. But all knowledge comes from beyond time and space via Moses and Buddha and Krishna and Zoroaster and Muhammad and Christ, the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And we're told in different ways by each of them that at different times and in different places in history, new knowledge had to be revealed for the purpose of reminding human beings of their nature, which is spiritual and material. And secondly, they taught us how to apply that. We call that social law. And periodically, these messengers would come and change social law. But they all talked about, prior to Baha'u'llah's arrival, that there would come a time in which one of these messengers, the fifth Buddha, the 12th Imam, the reincarnation of Krishna, the Gaim, right? The return of Christ in the station of the Father, that they would come and establish the golden age, the kingdom of heaven on earth, or the divine civilization. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's who Baha'u'llah says he is. He is that title of each of those faiths. He's the Messiah. Now, that's a major claim. And all I can say is, I don't live here, but I would facilitate it long distance. But look at all around you. There's a lot of people who would love to help as well. And they have these study courses to say, we'll answer your questions. But tonight we're just going to plant the appetizer out there and say, what about this thing, the kingdom of heaven on earth, and this piece of that section called the divine economy? What about that? Well, here it is. If you wanted to build the kingdom of heaven on earth, what would you include? Stable economy. Beauty.
The end of poverty.
The end of poverty. What holy scriptures out there of all the world's religions have not included something about the poor? Doesn't exist, does it? They all talk about the necessity to take care of the poor. So there's something involved in that. And we use that word poor in relationship to how somebody is capable of having the basic necessities of life. My contention from an economic standpoint is if you want to build the potential of a human being, you must give them the tools. So universal compulsory education is one of those that you must include for every human being to have a shot. If they can't gather enough knowledge from those around them, but particularly if they can't gather enough knowledge through their own investigation, meaning the ability to read and write, then they're handicapped from the very start. You want to build something? Build a human being. Now, we said human beings are dual nature. There is this material side, which is what we oftentimes completely focus on. But then there's this abstract side that we refer to as the spirit. Now, what does that mean, spirit? Well, in a scientific term, it's something not confined to time and space. Now, if you love the concept of science, go out and get real up to date on what quantum physics is discovering. Because all of a sudden, the definition of God gets bigger because of science. Think about this. If Christ came to this planet to reveal and provide salvation for humanity, is this the only planet that God created that has the potential for life to know and love God? Or is it possible that this force greater than human beings on this planet is bigger than that? And is it possible that within our solar system, there is other kinds of life that maybe don't have that ability, but then step out our solar system and go into our galaxy, and then step outside of that galaxy and go to the universe? Baha'u'llah says that creation is the beginning without a beginning. That makes God a lot bigger, doesn't it? It doesn't confine it to a fundamentalist approach of 12, 13,000 years, does it? It's constant. The beginning without a beginning and an end without an end. And Baha'u'llah says that now that you've asked me of life on other planets, he said, think about this, that for every grain of sand, you ever go to the beach? You live in Florida, surely you have. You pick up a handful of sand, can you count the grains of sand? It's a lot, isn't it? Well, think about on this planet, all the grains of sand. This is his analogy. There is a star. They, their planets. And they, their life. Now, how big is God getting just in that analogy to you? It's getting bigger, isn't it? How much more magnificent the beauty. Okay? Think about that. And then is it possible that God, this unknowable essence, said, aha, I want to communicate with that life form, and found a means by which that life form, created a means by which that life form, on whatever that galaxy is, that solar system is, that universe is, God sent a messenger. Now that's a lot bigger than I grew up with in a fundamentalist Christian environment. But then the scientists are taking it much further. They're saying that's only one universe. And there are parallel dimensions and parallel universes. And they've been able to show that just a single particle of light is already pre-programmed to know what it is supposed to do. A photon actually has enough information that the scientists try to fool it, and it still does what it was programmed to do. And they didn't program it. So this force that we refer to as God, we put limitations on it because we're limited. It gets bigger and bigger as our knowledge gets bigger. What's interesting is that in all the Holy Scriptures, there is a limitation that's placed on the amount of knowledge that we are allowed to receive at that time. Christ himself said, I have many things to tell you, and you cannot bear them. But when the Son of Truth comes, he will reveal them to you. But Baha'u'llah himself says that he was given the privilege to speak and deliver the message for the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. But then he was stopped, and no more. Hidden words, go back to that passage, it's in the hidden words, and you'll see that. Shoghi Effendi in this book describes that and interprets it very well so that you kind of know what that means. Isn't that interesting? Whew, this is deep stuff. Now here we are trying to get this supply and demand system going. And we've experimented with it for several thousand years, right? And we've put values on things, food, clothing, shelter. Baha'u'llah has raised the bar because he's redefined. He didn't create a technical economic system. He's just raised the bar for civilization because now we're mature as a society. We don't live in caves anymore. So he's given this the information to look at ourselves as a planet, as a single species of God's creation on a planet that has the ability to know and love this force. And then we can talk about divine civilization. Now, for the Baha'is, there are two significant books that kind of lay out the blueprint for this divine economy. But this is the blueprint. There's two books that we view as authoritative. One is called the Kitabi Akdas, which is the most holy book. Okay, and it's a book of spiritual teachings and laws, but don't be mistaken, that's not all Baha'u'llah wrote. He spent most of his life in prison, just like all the other messengers. He was persecuted. Spent most of his life in prison and exile, but he wrote hundreds of volumes on virtually all of the subjects, and where he said that it was necessary for humanity to apply relevancy to the day as time progressed, he created a system to do that. He didn't just kind of come, reveal, and leave us alone. He knew we needed something more, because we were going to go and investigate truth for ourselves, and we were going to ask a lot of questions for the first time in religious history. We were given the freedom to do so, along with education, and along with the ability to include women and persons of every race. And so they raised the bar and told us how we function in that Kitabi Akdas, and then the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha. Those are the foundations of the building of the divine economy. Okay? And Shoghi Effendi reiterates it in this book, as well as in The Advent of Divine Justice and in The Promised Day Has Come. Those three books. This is the one that he wrote first as a collection of his letters to the Baha'is of the world. Now, Shoghi Effendi reminds us in the concept of divine civilization that the foundations of that, it's on page 16, it's the Will and Testament and the Kitabi Akdas. So if you're taking notes, there it is. Okay. Somebody comfortable in reading? I know, Bob, you don't mind.
I'll read if you want.
I would. Do you mind? And I've got it highlighted, which I'd like you to read. And it seems a little long, but it's not. I'd like you to just start and go to where I've ended the highlight. Okay?
It's not long. Hi. Hello.
Remember, I said we're going to go to the source, so here we go.
Okay. For Baha'u'llah, we should readily recognize, has not only imbued mankind with a new and regenerating spirit, he has not merely enunciated certain universal principles or propounded a particular philosophy, however potent, sound, and universal they may be. In addition to these, he, as well as Abdu'l-Baha after him, has, unlike any dispensation of the past, clearly and specifically laid down a set of laws, established divine institutions, and provided for the essentials of a divine economy. These are destined to be a pattern for future society, a supreme instrument for the establishment of the most great peace, and the one agency for the unification of the world and the proclamation of the reign of righteousness and justice upon the earth. Not only have they revealed all the directions required for the practical realization of those ideals, which the prophets of God have visualized, and which from time immemorial have inflamed the imagination of seers and poets in every age. They have also, in unequivocal and emphatic language, appointed those twin institutions of the House of Justice and the Guardianship as their chosen successors, destined to apply the principles, promulgate the laws, protect the institutions, adapt loyally and intelligently the faith to the requirements of progressive society, and consummate the incorruptible inheritance which the founders of the faith have bequeathed to the world.
Thank you. Okay, divine civilization, divine economy. They use the word justice, and for the first time in religious history, we have an authentic, authoritative specific guidance for succession. But not just succession, authoritative succession that potentially did not include the Holy Scripture. So therefore, that can have an opportunity, that succession, to continue some sort of an authoritative guidance. So if we're going to have the kingdom of heaven on earth, and a subject comes up, and it's not specific, and we don't want to leave it to human doctrine and human interpretation. Because what's the result of that? We were speaking earlier this evening about this concept of human interpretation. I'll go back to my roots. There are over 20,000 denominations of Christianity in the world today. Some are as many as a handful of people in one denomination, and others are thousands. But guess what? That came from human interpretation. So was it necessary for Christ to return in the first place? Why would Christ say that I would come in the station of the Father? It's for the renewal process. And so every time they come, they get more specific because civilization is advanced. You follow that? Okay. And then here it used the word justice. Well, how on earth do we get justice without that human emotion? Because it can be interpreted improperly, like revenge. So there's some methodology that we're going to be given in establishing the kingdom of heaven on earth. But if we are spiritual in nature, we've always been given methodology to work on that spiritual concept, to know and love God, and to develop the purity and the kindness in our hearts. We do that through prayer and meditation. All religions have done that in some form, right? We do it with fasting, and we do it with service. Correct? I mean, we all take our professions to go out and serve God's creation. So, when the bar is raised a little bit, we say, okay, well, what else is out there? How about taking it to a different level we would call a world commonwealth? Divine civilization, not just the importance on a specific nation, but the world. We take it to that level. We educate all of humanity with compulsory education. We eliminate the racial prejudices, but all kinds of prejudices, right? We include in that process the equality of men and women to the degree, and we had a discussion earlier this morning about the educational process, that if you are in a family in which you have a male child and a female child, and you can only educate one, we're instructed specifically in the Baha'i faith that it must be the female child, because she's the first educator of humanity. And remember, this is about establishing the kingdom of heaven on earth. You want to build something, you build human knowledge. You build human beings. And how do you do that? Provide knowledge. All knowledge comes from beyond us. It's there. And we as human beings get in those creative modes spiritually and intellectually and emotionally, and we tap into that. But that's us. And we make mistakes. But the messengers of God, assuming they are the messengers of God, speak with authority. They're not philosophers. They don't say shoulda, coulda, woulda. They speak with divinity. We defined that earlier, didn't we? Okay? So we have to have a language that we can communicate, a universal language. Okay? Society has already gone through that process. Remember the Tower of Babel? We couldn't communicate with one another. We have to have the ability to communicate. Okay? So that's one of them. Science and religion we talked about. The oneness of religion we talked about. Okay. What are the standards of the divine economy? Justice and opportunity and search for truth, and equality, and unity. Now, I'm going to tell you something. There's a lot in the Baha'i writings about unity. It just permeates it. Step out of our traditions, whatever they are, and start tapping into this concept of oneness and unity, and start tapping into it from a scientific standpoint, and it gets awesome. Because now you start thinking about the organism of creation and how we, as part of that, feel the vibrancy and the force and the energy that's being influenced by love. You mentioned that word, didn't you? In the Baha'i writings and in other scriptures, we've heard the word God is love. We've heard that love is light. Remember the scientific terminologies that we go on? But outside of time and space, and I'm not a scientist, but you step outside of time and space, and what do you get? Well, you don't have elements there, right? So you don't have things that are in motion, like vibrations, but you still have energy. And that love is there's this love, and there's that energy that creates the light, and then that light put forth in the veil of the time and space syndrome, all of a sudden we start experiencing that energy in the force of atoms, etc. We'll take that down to our relationship, and that love is manifest in us. Our ability to attract. It is even scientifically the force, we're told in the Baha'i writings, that it is the force that holds the elements together. Gravity would be another word for that a scientist might use. It is the force that gives electricity its potential. Interesting, this thing called love. Okay? Now, in the past, we have had these messengers come, and they have revealed to us this knowledge, and then in addition to which, they have talked to us about the concept of God and given us some understanding of it in terms of the attributes of God. But interestingly enough, there's a passage that Baha'u'llah uses in a book called the Kitab-i-Iqan. And it says, knowledge is 20 and 7 letters. This is his analogy. He says it's 20 and 7 letters. And all the prophets have revealed all the prophets have revealed are 2 letters thereof. 20 and 7 letters. And all the prophets previous to Baha'u'llah have revealed 2 letters. No man thus far hath known more than these 2 letters. But when the Qayyim, who Baha'u'llah claims to be, when the Qayyim shall arise, he will cause the remaining 20 and 5 letters to be made manifest. It's pretty heavy-duty stuff. So we have all this knowledge now that's laid out. And we have a divine system in place for continuity and succession. This is what Baha'u'llah is telling us, and some of us have stepped out on faith and says, that fits me, and I believe in who he says he is. Now what am I going to do about it? Well, I take the methodology of trying to understand justice and kindness and mercy. But there is an ingredient in there that is necessary, that is the foundation of economics. And it's a spiritual standard. Do you know what it is? Integrity is a piece of this. Honesty is a piece of it. And trustworthiness. Now I'm going to give you an interesting question. It's kind of esoteric. How many of you know how big the national debt is in the United States? 8 trillion and change, and getting higher, right? Okay. Now here we've spent $8 trillion we don't have. In just one economy on this planet. And why have we done that? Is it stupidity? Well, let me ask you another question then. I think most of us would laugh because we want to agree, but we cringe as we agree. But how big would that national debt be? This is esoteric. How big would it be if we were all honest? If we were all honest. If we were honest, how big would the national debt be? Hey, he says there'd be no national debt. I'd like to agree with him. How big would jails be? How big would the courts be? How big would the Food and Drug Administration be? The Environmental Protection Agency be? It might, but it sure wouldn't be huge, right? How big would the military have to be? Thank you. Who said that? You might not need it. Think about that. Whew. How much money would we spend to protect our borders? This is economics. We're spending money to protect ourselves from ourselves because we have not gotten one of these totally down, and that's honesty and trustworthiness. That's big, and yet it's not new. Baha'u'llah just reiterated it in a sense of world civilization. Have you read anything about honesty in the other world's religions? Of course you have. But it is a spiritual principle. Let me give you an idea. How many of you like to do business with dishonest people? Nobody raised their hand. Well, how good of a deal could you make with a dishonest person? You'd question every deal you made, wouldn't you, if you knew they were dishonest? Can you make a good deal with a dishonest person? Well, you would be losing sleep wondering, I wonder if they rip me off. This is a basic principle that deals with our nature of spirituality. And yet you take that as a community and apply it in a social economic system. And one dishonest person causes laws to be made that affect everyone else.
All right. So here we are in this challenge of building the divine economy. And Baha'u'llah has given us this blueprint. And you know what? It doesn't matter if you're Baha'i or not. Because since the coming of Baha'u'llah, we can list, and we don't have the time, we can list one thing after another, after another, after another that has come from the Baha'i writings into civilization, including the World Commonwealth concept. What do we call it? United Nations. Right? Interesting. We just keep working away at it. Trial and error. We start realizing, Jesus, this dishonest person over here, I better create a standard just to have a fair shot for everybody. We're building the kingdom of heaven already as a world. Methodology. Let's talk about it. We said prayer, fasting, charity, fellowship, getting together, obviously, etc., etc. Virtues we've talked about, but let's describe some others. There's one that we don't often think about that's absolutely critical, and as a society we need to learn a lot about. It's called consultation.
And it has to do with service. Okay? Inherent in each human being is the desire to be of service. It's part of our happiness is to know that we've helped somebody else. and you want to do well at it, you got to get educated and have an opportunity. When does that service stop in a human being's life? Is it at a specific age? Shoghi Effendi's pretty explicit about it. It's not. When you're what? When you're horizontal, when they put you 6 feet under, right? Think about that. That doesn't have anything to do with being paid. So retirement is just changing positions. It doesn't mean that you're just living and wondering what's for dinner. Now, we all know people that are retired and that's their life. Now, I manage wealth. And when people come to me and say, can I afford to retire? That's not the question they're really asking. This is not a money question, because I manage wealth. What is the question they're asking? What are you going to do with who you are, and what are you going to become? So if you're a doctor or a lawyer and you say, I'm ready to retire, you're just changing titles. If you're a nurse and you're ready to retire, are you really going to retire? You're just changing titles. You understand that? Because as a spiritual being, it's part of you to want to be of service. I saw people back there cooking. How many of those people were cooking back there are professional cooks? No one raised their hand. Those people put on a good food for, don't you think? Don't you think? And you know, they were doing it out of service. In my Baha'i community, I know that there's several people who are extremely wealthy, and they're the best cooks. And they love doing it, and they never bring the subject up that they're the wealthiest people in our Baha'i community. They just know how to cook, and it has nothing to do with their title and their pocketbook. They want to be of service. And it's their place where they feel good about this. Okay, so work is important. All right, and we're almost done. Consultation, there are rules of consultation in the Baha'i faith. So as you become familiar with it, it will be something that you'll start appreciating. Because those rules of consultation are being adopted all over the world, by the way. Okay? It's very interesting. Rate of interest. Now, this is an economic term. But there were specific laws in the previous dispensation that said you couldn't charge interest on a loan. And Baha'u'llah abrogated that. How many of you knew that? That there were laws that said you couldn't charge interest on a loan? Only a handful of you know that. But in the Muslim faith, you're not allowed to charge interest on a loan for somebody. Okay? Baha'u'llah abrogated that because there is a process and a standard of fairness and justice that he raised as to what is appropriate. He talked about currency, a uniform currency. He talked about taxation, and he raised the bar on it. He talked about the storehouse. He talked about profit sharing. It's interesting, the kingdom of heaven on earth. This is just the outline. Every time you pick up a hidden word as a Baha'i, your Bible as a Christian, ask the question, what would I expect out of the divine economy? Raise the standard in your own study to say, economics is a system from God, where human beings serve one another and place value on one another. And say it's time to educate that child. It's time to provide an opportunity for each of us. In the world of economics, when you exclude human knowledge, you may get some things done, but I always love using the big three auto manufacturers since I live in Michigan. And this is a do-over, by the way. For golf term, it's called a mulligan. We had this experience of energy crisis once before in this country, It was in the 70s, wasn't it? Now, the automakers didn't get it in Michigan. What happened is that they lost huge market share for an inferior product because it got better gas mileage. But that opened the door for Americans to say, there are other auto manufacturers around the world. And that market share has, for those big three, has shrunk continuously in this country. It's actually grown in other countries. Why? Because they make economic cars in other countries. Interesting. So if you have cut off human knowledge and human opinion, you become intellectually incestuous. But if you include human knowledge and human opinion, you get more creative and you get the benefit of human ingenuity. And in the Baha'i community, we're instructed to do this, to create models of inclusiveness as the model for the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Thank you.
We're going to continue on with some questions and answers. If anyone, does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask?
Any questions? Yes.
Given what's happening in the economy with credit card companies charging up to 30% or maybe more, and CEOs that are being fired from Fannie Mae and other companies, or they may not have been fired, but they're bringing in millions of dollars a year as their employees are getting laid off or fired or whatever, and people are losing their homes. And what could you say that how could we take action to help change this, to bring that order that you're talking about?
Well, first of all, we see some things in the Baha'i writings about fairness between labor and management. Another word they use is capital and labor, okay? And it doesn't eliminate the concept of ownership. What it does is that it just raises the bar about fairness. And one of the places that we find in Foundations of World Unity particularly, there's an example of the concept of profit sharing. And there is some standards about strikes and about unions and things of this nature, about the relationship between management and labor. Remember this concept called consultation? So out of consultation, if you were in management and somebody else was in labor and you were consulting on this concept of the greatest level of productivity, which is good for us, in a way that's fair. I'm not talking about working 24 hours a day, right? It's an issue of then saying, okay, what's fair? And that really requires conditional discussion, meaning that it's in a particular environment. And since you gave one, and I'm supposed to know something about Fannie Mae's and Ginnie Mae's and Freddie Mac's, etc., and the other specific you gave was extreme salaries versus, and sometimes it's 40 to 400 times what the average worker of the company is making. The executive is making 40 to 400 times their salaries, right? That's your question. Well, I believe in free enterprise, but I don't believe that's fair. I believe that I'm going to give you a basic salary, but once that basic salary is not being justified, then it needs to be readdressed. Now, if you're the owner of the company, you can do whatever you choose, but at some point, somebody, some customer, somebody's going to call you on the carpet. Publicly traded companies should have a more active shareholder involvement because they, in essence, are the owners. Now, the question is it fair for somebody to make $100 million a year running an international organization? And that's a relative term. And if they're running it into the ground, obviously we know they haven't deserved it. But what if they have brought value? It's awfully hard to justify to the person that's making minimum wage. But the shareholders have said it's okay. Now, if you're going to raise the bar in a divine economy, you got to do something a little nicer as it relates to those employees that have brought the money in. So Abdu'l-Baha spends a lot of time on this concept of profit sharing. And it's not just profit sharing and deferred compensation on a pension plan, okay? It's actually the shares of the company have been set aside to benefit the employees for the work that they've done. And this is a long discussion. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, a lot of dishonesty in this process. And it's all coming out. The subprime lending, all the incentives were in place for dishonesty to flourish. Huge commissions to give a loan to somebody who had no means of paying off a mortgage. And then they take that same mortgage and they go sell it, bundle it up, stick it into a Freddie Mac, and the public goes out and buys the bonds of the Freddie Mac, and guess what? House of cards that you've created. And it potentially put huge companies out of business. And those that stayed in business, suffering dramatically. So you got the big banks of the world whose finances are really difficult right now because they played a game of greed, not common sense. Somebody asked me about my own company, and this is not a place to do a commercial. But honesty, we had this discussion with our CEO, and he said, no, we're not getting involved in this. This is not right. Whew. That's what it's about. Do the right thing. A lot of people didn't. And our economy has been really, really damaged. And trustworthiness has come into question all day long, 24/7. Right? And this concept of getting a mortgage, used to, that was a noble cause. Now you look at a mortgage person and think, is that a shyster? I mean, think about that. It's a noble cause when you make it noble. But a lot of people didn't. In my profession, a lot of people are dishonest in my profession. But the truth of the matter is that it's less than 1%, statistically. But that 1%, whoever said it, we create the laws to protect us against that 1%. But sometimes that 1% creates a standard where other people think, whoa, that's big money, let's go after this. And it's created a very, very, very serious problem. I've been at this 30 years and I've not seen it this bad. Talk about economics from a standpoint of human ingenuity. When there's a problem, some human being says, I have an idea. Okay? And there's some really famous ones out there. Thomas Edison, he became a creativity factory. If you come to Michigan, you can actually, his labs were in New Jersey, but we moved them to have a tourist attraction in Michigan. So they're at one of our museums. But it's literally a creativity factory. Today, to feed a human being is cheaper today as a percentage of your earned income than it was 50 years ago. Doesn't mean it's higher quality food. It just means that it was cheaper. I knew somebody was thinking that, so that's why I threw that in. Now, who created that? Human beings did. And ultimately, businesses did. Now, what did we say? Human knowledge and human opinion. So here it is. Human beings perceive a problem. They investigate the problem. They create solutions for it. They do research and development for it. They do a whole developmental process for it. They test market it. Right? And then ultimately, in that test marketing, they tweak it, and then they go full-fledged. Now, this has been going on since we have had recorded history, human ingenuity. Now, this problem that she brought up is big, it's deep, and it's international. There's very few banks that are any size in the United States, and particularly Europe and Asia, that escape subprime lending. Either because they participated in buying the loans as an investment, because it was a higher yield, or because they invested themselves in their own trading desks for it. And Bear Stearns got caught with that. And then they borrowed money called margin and bought more of it. And so as soon as that happened, they lost all the liquidity because they had this thing called a margin call. And they had to start selling to meet the margin call, which brought the price of all the bonds down. And ultimately, banks got caught up in this, and it was literally a house of cards. Now, I know I'm using technical terms, but let me tell you something. Out of this process, the investment business and the banking business and the mortgage business has had to look at itself with a different level of integrity. Okay? Now, it goes back to the $8 trillion we talked about, trying to protect ourselves from ourselves. But you know what? We're not all honest. And the voice of God, we believe, has raised the bar, given us a standard, and we have to step up to that standard. Trial and error. We're going to get there, but it's not going to be easy. But I'm going to tell you something. You cannot be a Baha'i without hope. I don't believe you can. Because Baha'u'llah shows the future in his writings. It's the kingdom of heaven on earth. Does it mean there's no pain in the meantime? We know there's pain. We have brothers and sisters all over the world that are being persecuted. Not just in the Baha'i faith, but in every faith for their beliefs as human beings. They're being ridiculed. Women are not equal all over the world. Persons of different color are not equal all over the world. But as Baha'is who believe differently, we have to step up. We cannot be passive in any of these areas. And we have to build Baha'i communities that show that it works, so the world has a model to follow. Yes. It's a system of providence. And if we're not following God's word, what are we following? We're following our own intuition, and there's going to be greed involved in this process. You know, this thing called Satan is redefined by the Baha'i faith. It's called self. It's either service for humanity and someone other than yourself, or you're trying to serve yourself. And there's a good analogy, and I'll get to you. There's a good analogy. Cancer. Cancer propagates by what? It grows, right? By what? Destroying cells. Ultimately, it destroys itself by destroying the organism that is the host. Now, we are each cells. We're either vibrant and healthy and selfless, and therefore benefit by prolonging the well-being of the organism, or we're cancerous. Now, that's being a little blunt, but that's our daily routine, right? We're each challenged with our own personal conflicts of interest when we make business decisions every day. We're challenged with the ethics and the integrity every day when we make business decisions. And yet, it's part of the economy, which is God's system. It's human beings serving God's creation.
How are we going to be able to affect change when the powers to be are living in a system where they've created the corruptness?
Well, let's go back to the analogy of cancer. You show me a company that its mission is to do X, but its application is built upon dishonesty, and I'll show you a business that'll go out of business in a fairly short period of time. Now, companies that have lasted 100 or 200 years have done so with some level of integrity. They may make mistakes, they may have created a problem, but at some point they have a process in place that tries to step up with some level of responsibility to fix it. And in this world, there's enough volatility in the market that you're not safe just because you're big. Bear Stearns was big, and if you don't know how big, go back and look. They were huge, and they went out of business really fast because of lots of high levels of dishonesty. So my personal belief, this is me, is that you will see dishonesty manifested not just in a human being, but in the organizations they're part of, that they're influencing. Just now we do, but just the opposite. You show me a human being in an organization that's full of integrity, who steps up for that integrity. They may be ridiculed, but at some point, they change their environment. Now, the ones that are called on the carpet because they're whistleblowers, or they're called on the carpet because, you know, they're going against what they perceive to be a lack of integrity, those are tough situations. But I think human beings, go back to love, I think human beings are attracted. They're this magnet, this force, they're attracted to integrity. How many of you here would hire a dishonest person to take care of your children? Now, maybe we don't have that same standard at work, but at home we do, right? How many of you here would hire a drug addict to take care of your children? I don't see any hands. Now, how many of boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies know for a fact that every employee is honest and is drug-free? Are they hypocrites? I think so. I'm being hard, but I think so. But think about it another way. You want to influence something? Raise the bar. Here's how it works. Economics. The drug problem, this is my belief, should not have to be a legal issue. It's a moral issue. It's a productivity issue. It's a spiritual issue. It's a psychology issue. And it's a medical issue. But it doesn't have to be a legal issue. So if you were the chairman of Coca-Cola, and you said everyone in Coca-Cola, whether you're an employee, a supplier, or a contractor, you're going to raise the standard on illicit drugs by taking a drug test. I'll be the first one, meaning you're raising your hand. You put out a full-page ad. This is economics, by the way. Put out a full-page ad and said, this is the standard at Coca-Cola. Now, some people will stop drinking Coca-Cola because they think you went too far. And others will switch from Pepsi to Coca-Cola. Why? Because you're serious. If you're an actor and you're doing a TV commercial, prove to me that you're drug-free. You see? You're not a hypocrite anymore. You're not hiring the drug addict to babysit your kids. We're all guilty of this, by the way. We're all guilty of this. We've all bent the rules a little bit. We've all tolerated it. We all think, I wasn't hurt that bad. Okay? We're talking about the kingdom of heaven on earth. All of a sudden, this is a different generation of kids coming up. And they're going to look at things differently. The millennium generation is very different. They ain't stupid. They're very smart. And when you show them God's word, they look at it they're going to have a different standard than jaded lives of somebody my age. They're going to force me to step up because they're in my Baha'i community. They're going to call me on stuff. You see that? This is a model that's in process. It's a day-to-day decision. Remember, I said every day we're confronted with our decisions. Every day. And we are affected by our own conflicts of interest in the structures and organizations that we're involved in. Now, if you're in control, you got a bigger responsibility than if you're just an assembly line worker who's there to do their job at the best of their ability with the greatest of spirit and go home. And all you're worrying about is the quality control that's right there. You're only focused on that. I didn't answer it real well, but I'm just elucidating my belief. I know in my heart, after many years of business, I started my first business when I was 10. I know in my heart, when I'm associated with honest people, how I'm attracted to them, how I want to be around them, and how the fellowship of the godly is a challenge that Baha'u'llah gives us in the Holy Scriptures. It's in the Jewish faith, the Buddhist faith, the Hindu faith. You want to be good, you got to get around the good. Michael Jordan didn't get good as a basketball player by playing bad basketball around bad basketball players. The Olympic stars are facing the best in the world right now, aren't they? They didn't get there with bad coaches and bad challenges. They got there by being around the Michael Phelps. Everybody hear this? What's your standard for what products you use? Supply and demand. You know what? I believe that's a spiritual process. And sooner or later, people get it. Sooner or later, they get it. If that were not the case, why are SUVs sitting on lots and not being sold today? It's not because they're immoral. It's not because they were dishonest human beings working on an assembly line doing these. They had great intentions. This was their work. They brought those paychecks home, and they supplied food for their families. That's not a dishonest process. But somebody in there decided our mission is to sell these things. And maybe they should have provided greater leadership to not only do that, but to do it at better economic costs as it relates to energy. Okay? So here we are, supply and demand. Now we have an economy in which if you want to fix that, what's your waiting list for a hybrid, for example? My wife went out and bought a Toyota recently, and she was going to look at a hybrid, and it was 6 months before and she needed a car right then. She goes, oh boy, okay, I'll go and buy something else. Understand this? So this demand thing is, now when did Toyota start that? Does anybody know? How long ago did they start hybrid research? The hybrid research, knowing intentionally what they were going to do, they began the research 25 years ago. Now, we heard T. Boone Pickens talk about natural gas to drive cars. I lived in, the first place I heard of the Baha'i faith was not Michigan, it was in Japan. And I heard not only of the Baha'i faith in Japan, but I heard of natural gas running the taxi cabs and propane running the taxi cabs. Why? Because of pollution issues. Now this is in the late 60s. So where's the leadership? The issue here is that we as human beings have to ultimately step out on good faith somewhere in our relationships of business. But somewhere in there, we've also got to make it known what we want, or else they're going to sell you what they want you to buy. Well, without going into the politics side, because Baha'is are instructed that they can't be part of partisan politics, but we are political, so we vote. And I believe that as a Baha'i, you definitely ought to vote. That's my belief. I think to be a good citizen, you need to say, this person is the standard that I think is best for our society, and I'm going to vote for them. Or this bill is best for our society, and I'm going to vote for it. It's not going to be perfect because it's an imperfect process, but I believe I need to do that as a human being. I just feel, now, in my state, I can't go vote in a primary because I'm not part of a partisan political structure. But I believe that the Baha'i writings are pretty explicit about the unity of humanity is best served without belonging to a party politics, political party. And yet we can be active in issues. And we can hold our politicians to standards, and we can write them letters, and we can meet them. I know my congressmen. I know my senators. I know them personally. And when I see them, I'm not ashamed. I'll talk to them about the Baha'is in Iran, how they're being persecuted. But I do it face to face. I don't just write them letters. I hold their feet to the carpet. I believe that's my responsibility. Thank you.
Michael Hampton, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.